Hi everyone, it's Linda from LyndaCreates, and this is part 2 of the slow stitching notebook that I'm making. And it became such a long video, so I broke it into different parts. And this one will be a lot of the embellishing, where I do a lot of tacking everything down, so check it out. So I'm getting ready to stitch down my woven parts, and I want them all random. So I'm working now on the weaving part here. So I'm starting with trying to get them as straight as possible, trying to change up the height a little bit. And again, this is the piece that's the shortest, so it will determine where I can move these around to. And because the bottom is kind of hidden by the lace, I can adjust the top. And I'm just going to pin the bottom right now. Okay, so this is going to be the bottom. I can also pin the top. Make sure it's straight. So now I kind of have these adjusted where I want it to go. So because this is the shortest, I'm going to let go on top of that. I'm just going to pin to the side here. Okay, and it's just like weaving. Now I don't have this tail tucked down yet. I'm going to save it till the end because I know I'm going to have to pull it a little bit. Right. And I'm also trying to adjust the ends on this side as well as I go. Make the left side go a little random and the right side go a little random. So, see, I knew that basket weaving class I took in summer camp would come in handy someday. So now this one I need to have, this is why I didn't pin the other side of this, is that this needs to go like that and look like it can cover that. Now the bottom is actually up a little bit, but I could pin it and hold it in place. And what I did too is that I kept, if it had a selvage and I liked the look of it, I kept that. This fabric was part of a sample book, so it has that zigzag cut. Kept that. So just keeping it authentic. So that is the woven part. Let me think about this. I have this that's going to go there, and I have this that's going someplace here, something like that. That's interesting. This is going to go down here. Did my 3 daisies. Can you see that up in that corner? And I'm going to have this. Okay, so that's the center Okay, so it's going to come this much into the front and that much into the back. I don't want it perfectly centered, so it'll be something like that. I think other than a whole bunch of pins in this thing, I think that's kind of where I want it. I still have my butterfly roughly from this point to roughly this point will be the front of the binder. So you want to be over a little bit more. So it has a combination of the weaving, which creates a neutral background, some lace, some stitching. Okay, that looks pretty good for the front. And now the back, roughly here. Okay, so the back will be, that's the spine, that's the back. Everything is very interesting to look at. So much of the pieces that are on here are very meaningful to me. And any place that I feel needs a little something extra, like can just have more stitching on it. I think I could pin down these pieces that are going to be stitched and start looking into tacking everything down. Actually, I don't want to pin the applique pieces down yet, because I need to do some stitching, slow stitching on the background. Okay, so I'm going to take all the applique pieces off and I will start doing some slow stitching. Here, pinned everything down to where I want it. And now this is part 2 where I'm starting to do the slow stitching. And I'm using some crochet cotton. I'm not sure, it's pretty thin. It's white and I had a lot of it, probably from another project long ago. Not sure what I was making. But because it is a little bit thicker of a thread, I'm having to use a little bit bigger needle. It will be interesting because I have some pieces that have a lot of layers, so we'll see what happens as I go. But I've started down in this corner here, or in the center here, because I know this linen is going to be the centerpiece, and it is one of the furthest back pieces. So let me come in a little bit. So basically all I'm doing for the slow stitch is I'm going, you could do 2 at a time. You could do many, if you could pull more, you can do more at a time. I have a little trouble with the pulling part, pinching and pulling, so I have a needle puller. What I'm trying to do is I'm just doing a running stitch along the way. I just want to do some nice relaxing slow stitching. So let me show you. Just above that lace is my slow stitching. It's also kind of fun to think, this is a vintage piece of embroidery, a little piece of linen that I bought. And it's kind of fun to think, how many years ago did someone sit there and do those flowers, and now I'm taking it and making something different out of it. Okay, so I came to the end of this piece. I'm not going to continue down under here. It'll just get way too thick, but the stitches on top will hold it in place. So what I want to do, this flower piece right here, this colorful piece that you can see right there, is a separate piece. So I'm going to stitch that one down right now. And now you can see the stitch a little bit better right there. Now I'm going to come across this overlap. I wanted it intentionally to overlap in front. I can just keep stitching over that. I think basically what I'm trying to say is there's not necessarily a right and wrong way to do it. It's just relax, have fun. Maybe the best thing I heard described as don't overthink it. Let me pull back a little bit. So you can see I'm just working my way across the bottom. I'm kind of using this fabric as my go-to for anything that's needing some color. I could put a piece down here. When they create this edge. And so it'll come out to about here. A little touch of color, which is great right there. I needed that. So now what I could do, now that I'm almost at the top of this piece, is I'm going to go back because I want this piece to stand out as a separate piece and not part of the weave. So I've just was stitching with that crochet cotton, and it was a little too thick and the needle had to be a little too big for the eye to be the right size, and it just wasn't a pleasant stitching experience. So I'm going to change to regular stranded cotton or embroidery floss, 6 strands, and continue stitching. But one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to check the size of what I'm planning, or check the size in comparison to the notebook that I want to do. So just make sure everything is covered. So let me pull back a little bit. Okay, so there's my notebook, and I know I wanted this piece to be in the middle there, and I'm just checking to see if everything's going to fit. So one thing I see, I have some white showing here, which I'm okay with. I may change it, but I do have it there. Okay, but everything else seems to wrap okay around it. And then let's flip it over carefully. Sorry, I think I had this over here. So this will cover some of that area, which is fine. At the bottom here, this edge is literally on the edge, which is great. I like the little rough edges, and these pieces will flip under. And the spine is looking good. Okay, so need to get back to stitching. So let me set this aside. So now back to the stitching part. The whole thing about slow stitching is having an enjoyable feel of the fabric and the thread, and just making it a nice experience. And I think another thing too that makes this a little bit different than my other projects, or some of my other slow stitch projects, is that this fabric, the backing fabric, is thicker because, again, it's going to be a notebook cover, so I wanted it to have some little more substance than just some thin cotton. So I've it's kind of built to be more sturdy, which explains why the stitching is a little more difficult. But this is quite pleasant right now. That I left the color bars in on the selvage, so it's these that marks the colors. It's pretty, so why not use it? I stitched along the L-shaped here along the bottom. This lace will be sitting on top of it and being stitched down, and I'm using regular thread. I don't want like a bold stitch to take away from this, the beauty of this lace, so I'm just going to do like a very tiny invisible stitch to hold it down. I'm trying to save the woven parts for last because they are more complex I'm trying to do it in layers. I'm just going to sew the bottom part of this lace down on top of this fabric and across over here. I won't do the top part yet until I determine how that's going to look. So I'm going to move to this corner here. I'm going to stitch down this piece and then work my way over. So the edge of the notebook will come to about where this pin is. And I have this lovely selvage on the end that's going to be lost. So I am going to do something to save it. Okay, so I have that piece. So I'm going to stitch it down here so it's not lost. So let me rotate that. Now this is very sheer fabric, so it is such a joy to stitch. I love how that little selvage is looking so wild and crazy right there. Next part is I'm going to slow stitch with embroidery floss across the top here, and I'm going to do it in white. I went across the top here. I'm going to come around this piece next. So 2 tips that I just discovered when you're doing this is, one, if you have any of the blue washable marker that you used, wash that off before you stitch down on top of it. Second tip is make sure you remove any pins or readjust pins so that they're not underneath something that you might stitch on top of, so you don't actually lock it down underneath something. So it's just a good thing to go through and feel before you stitch an area down. So I had to share this with you. Is evidently when you're slow stitching and you're just meditating, sewing a straight line is kind of optional, I guess. I was going to pull it all out and straighten it up, but then I realized what I'm going to do, it's going to be covered up with the doily eventually. So I'm not going to straighten it. And that's the beauty of slow stitching. You can do it, you can take it out and do it straight, because you'll probably be the only person who knows it's that crooked. Of course, I just shared that with everybody, so now everybody knows. But no one can notice it once I applied the doily over it. So just wanted to share my stitch fail. But I'm enjoying it. So the other thing I wanted to share is most of the big pieces, I think all of the big pieces that I wanted to stitch down are stitched in place. Crooked or not, they're stitched in place. So now what I decided, going back to the woven pieces, I'm not going to stitch down in the middle here, because they're going to hold in place as long as the ends are stitched down. So I'm just going to do, with thread, do a stitch on all of these loose tails so that they're held down in place. And while doing that, like this one, if I stitch down this tail, it'll also hold the the vertical weave in there as well. And I am going to try to sew a lot straighter. Let me turn it a little bit. And I'm going to stitch this until I come to the first vertical weave right there. So now I'm going to come up this point, or this tail. So I have this left hand side all stitched down along the edge. Now I'm considering I did not stitch along these raw edges here that are woven under. I may need to, maybe, maybe not. Some is starting to unravel, which is fine visually for me, but as I use it for the binder purpose that I'm thinking of, if it starts getting too distressed looking, I may need to stitch it down, but I won't know until I'm ready to do that. It's a real interesting texture. It's a nice way to add a large area of texture and colors, or fairly neutral colors, all at once. That's this side. I will start working on the other side. So I'm using an embroidery floss that is similar in color to this cheesecloth, and I am not sure at all how I'm going to stitch this down. Let's see. I was kind of thinking little cross stitches, little X's up and down, but then I thought it might be too straight with such a flexible shape. How do you stitch it to make it look rough and wild? To keep something in place, letting it stay looking wild and crazy. Because the cheesecloth keeps shifting and the threads keep moving around. I was just thinking, I feel like I'm trying to sew a cloud that keeps changing its shape. Something I'm realizing are these wrinkles are really cool. Like right here. If I could get more wrinkles in there. I love the randomness of stitching cheesecloth like this. Okay, look at that. It's looking very distressed. I love how that turned out. You can't see the stitches, but it looks like this thing is just rippling down the page. Oh, love that. So when I fussy cut this petal, it'll come right up next to that. I think I like that. I'm going to flip this because I want the most distressed end to be showing over here. Fold this down gently. I'm going to leave it folded like this because you could see sort of a straight line, just to give me an idea of where the bottom should go. And then from here on in, it's stitching it just like I did the other one, except now I know how cool the wrinkles can be. Right now, I'm just stitching down daisies. Well, I have a lot of stitching to do right here. I am stitching around the outer edge of the doily, and I just decided I'm also going to have to do a couple of rounds in here because I don't want it to catch and tear or do anything like that. So the other thing too is I was looking at this doily and I think it may be tatted. It's not crocheted, it's not knitted. There's areas that are woven or like a weave. I'm thinking maybe it's a tatted doily, and if so, I'm so happy. This is really cool. I'm trying to catch every few threads of the doily and tack it down. And I'm just using ecru colored thread. There's so much I want to do to embellish this too. Just keep working. So I fussy cut this flower out and I laid it on top, and I have it pinned right now, but I realize I'm going to have an issue. Part of it is that this lace under here is very textural. Let me show you if you could see it. It has a lot of bumps and thick parts, and stitching this flower down is going to be a problem, I could tell, because it's really, really thick. So this up here is going to be okay. It's just this area where the lace is behind there. So I'm going to work at cutting the lace away just behind the flower. So I'm going to use my washable pen, and I'm going to outline the areas that need to be cut away. It's just one of those things that you learn as you go. Okay, that's primarily the area. Okay, so I lift it off. I know that I want to take this area off. I definitely want to keep the lace visible back there. I just can't have it exactly behind the stitching because I plan to do a lot of stitching on that, and I think it would just become too difficult. My goal is to, before I start the embroidery, which will be part 3, my goal is to get everything prepped and hopefully get a lot of these pins. I keep stabbing myself with the pins, so I want to get the pins off of it. But that will be an ongoing process. What I'm going to do is lift up a little bit at a time and cut away. And this is really, really thick lace. This is kind of an unusual way to do this, I'm sure, but these little bits on the lace is actually at least 1/8 of an inch thick, so it is really hard to stitch through, and that is why it's being removed. I'm so happy to take this off. It's going to be so much easier to stitch without this here. So everything behind the flower is not bumpy. When I go back in and stitch the flower, it will be so much easier. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that, please like and subscribe to my channel. I upload new videos every Sunday. This is the end of part 2 of the slow stitching notebook. There are more parts. This is going to keep going because I have so much that I want to enjoy and do and share on this project. So check out my website, LyndaCreates.com. That's Linda with the Y. I have a lot more projects there and inspiration, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!